This is an exclusive excerpt from the Stuph File Program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Stefanie Powers has been a star since day one in both film and television. She was John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara's daughter in McClintock and Lee Remick's kid sister in Experiment in Terror on the big screen. And on the small screen, she was April Dancer, the girl from U.N.C.L.E., and of course, Jennifer Hart on Hart To Hart. Stefanie joins us via Zoom from California. Hi, Stefanie.
There was another series in there called The Feather and Father Gang.
Yes, I remember that as well.
In between. Yes.
I remember that as well.
Very well. Thank you, Peter. How are you?
Just tickety-boo. Thanks very much for being on the program with us. You have had such an illustrious career, but I want to start with something that is not Hollywood-related. And that was recently you were honored at the United Nations for your work with the William Holden Wildlife Foundation. Tell us about that.
Well, it actually has come in the form of an ebook where 25 of us, I'm thrilled to be in such company, have been honored and highlighted for the work we do in serving our causes. I think I'm the only one of the 25 who actually is working in wildlife conservation and the environment, which is something I've been, I guess one could say I've sort of been doing it all my life, but certainly never on this scale, because after William Holden's death, we were a couple for the last 10 years of his life. After his death, he had always wanted to build a wildlife education center for the local people in Kenya to be able to learn about their valuable flora and fauna and their world heritage animals and why it was important to preserve them. He had been doing such extraordinary work, unbeknownst to a lot of people, since 1959, when he created the first game ranch for the preservation of species in the whole of Africa, and I think it may have been the greater portion of the world. He was a visionary. 1959, no one had the word conservation in their vocabulary, let alone the idea of extinction. So he truly was a visionary, and his work with the Mount Kenya Game Ranch, which was his baby, brought him the greatest amount of satisfaction. I know he said many times to me that he felt that was the greatest work of his life. He fostered breeding programs of 37 species of East African wildlife, 5 of which are sadly no longer visible in the wild. So he truly did a remarkable job. He was really way before his time. And what Bill always wanted to do was to build this education component to the ongoing species survival programs that he was involved with. And so I thought it would be fitting that after his death, I would form a 501c3 public charity, meaning that anybody who donates money can deduct it from their taxes in order to preserve and reflect the work that Bill did and the consideration that he had for the flora and fauna of Kenya and for the people of Kenya, so that they themselves would learn about what was the wealth at their feet. It's very difficult to explain to people who really are living in many cases in the rural areas that we deal with, who are living in a subsistence way, that they mustn't exploit their environment and that they mustn't exploit everything within their environment, because then their environment will not sustain itself. But it's important that they know why it will not sustain itself.
Your work with the William Holden Wildlife Foundation must be very, very gratifying. And again, kudos to you for the award that you got. But let's talk a little bit about your career. I first fell in love with you, and it was a deep love, by the way, when you were the girl from U.N.C.L.E.
Oh, God. Well, thank you. I'm thrilled. It was my first foray into television because I had done a couple of little parts on episodic television up till then. But, you know, in the days when you were under contract to a studio, as I was in the twilight of the studio system, I wasn't allowed to do television. But as that progressed and the studios were all divesting themselves of the contracts that they had with actors, which was their kind of moniker. They had a stable of stars, and they had a stable of actors that they were grooming into the stars that they would then loan out and make more money on. So there was a very robust system that created Hollywood. And then it fell apart, largely due to the United States government saying that it was a monopoly, sort of like Apple today, but they don't do anything about Apple. They did a lot about the movie studios. They made them divest of their holdings. So prior to that divestment, they made the product, distributed the product, and exhibited the product in chains of cinemas. At the time, that was considered a monopoly. We now know that we are surrounded by monopolies, so it doesn't make much sense to us. But that was the end of a vibrant industry, and an industry which we're still living off of in its memory. In any event, the Girl from U.N.C.L.E, they sold me, Columbia sold me to MGM to do the Girl from U.N.C.L.E. At the time, an hour's television series had never had a woman starring in the title role. I guess it was a monumental moment, although we didn't make very much of it at the time. And I was only reminded of it a few years ago when PBS was doing a special program on so-called pioneers of television. And I was called and they said, would you join us? And I said, well, I'm hardly a pioneer. But they said, oh, no, the Girl from U.N.C.L.E was the very first time that a female had been the star of an hour-long television series.
You've also had an extensive stage career, and I'm going to get to Hart in a moment. But you've also had an extensive stage career and also a film career. But one of my favorite movies was when you played Lee Remick's kid sister in Experiment in Terror.
That was the first movie under contract at Columbia. That was Blake Edwards directing and Ross Martin playing the villain. He was scary, wasn't he?
Oh, he was very scary.
Yes, and that was a kind of baptism of fire, but at the same time, I was treated so well by Blake. He was such a great director. He knew how to manipulate this rather, I think I was, 16, 17? Yeah, I had my 17th birthday on that movie. Yeah. So I was 16 years old, and he knew how to handle me. He was able to get a performance out of me.
Well, let's flash forward to Hart. It's been 45 years since that show first went on the air. How did you get the role of on that particular show of Jennifer Hart? You had been in some series before that. Again, The Girl from U.N.C.L.E. and Feather and Father. And
no. Yeah, well, let me just explain a little bit about Hollywood in the days that I was growing up.
Yeah.
It was a very, very small town. And one way or another, everybody's lives seemed to crisscross. It was, yes, very much an industry town. Everybody and their brother knew somebody who worked in the industry and maybe knew a lot of people who worked in the industry or maybe worked in the industry themselves. So it was not unusual to receive a phone call from Robert Wagner, Tom Mankiewicz, and Aaron Spelling, because I knew them all extremely well. Aaron Spelling had been the coach of our girls' softball team in the Hollywood League. Robert Wagner, I had done an episode of It Takes a Thief, and then Tom Mankiewicz I practically grew up with. It was not an unusual phone call. That was the phone call to ask whether or not I'd be interested in coming and joining them to play Robert Wagner's wife in Hart to Hart, which was really explained to me by being more or less in the genre of the Thin Man movies. Do you remember the Thin Man movies?
Oh, absolutely.
Boy, yes, and William Powell, and I think they did 6 of them, if I'm not mistaken. And that was going to have that stylish, wonderful flow. But at the same time, I was in the midst of doing a production of Cyrano de Bergerac with Stacy Keach. We were opening out of town in San Francisco, and we were supposed to go to New York. It was an embarrassment of riches. And Aaron Spelling said, well, look, I think there might be a newspaper strike in New York. no play would ever come into New York to open in New York when there was a newspaper strike, because there was no way to publicize it or to publicize the critic. So all I can say is that was the happiest newspaper strike of my life. And I'm thrilled that the newspapers went out on strike because I was able to do the pilot of Hart to Hart.
You had been in several series before that, but obviously this is the biggest one. Did you know going in, and I'm thinking about compared to the two other previous shows that you had done, did you know going in that, this is going to be a hit? Or were you surprised as well as the audience as to how big of a hit it was going to be?
First of all, the other shows were considered to be big shows too at the time, but they never clicked.
Yeah.
The Hart to Hart did, and therefore it lasted for 5 years. And then we came back to do 5 years after the time we were canceled. We came back to do 8 2-hour movies for another network. So you never know. You're working a bit in a vacuum in the beginning of making a show, because all you have when it goes on the air are in those days the Nielsen ratings. It wasn't an immediate success. It started to build over time, but because Robert Wagner had a contract with the network and with Spelling and Goldberg to do the full year, which is almost unheard of today, we were going to finish that first year by hook or by crook, even if nobody watched the show. So it wasn't until later in the year that the buzz started to happen and people started to watch it.
In your long, illustrious career as an actor, what are you most proud of?
Well, I was very proud of something that I had a great deal to do with producing. It was a miniseries about the life of Beryl Markham. I don't know if that's not a familiar name to you, but she was the first woman to fly the Atlantic going west solo. Lindbergh had done it with a tailwind going east. He said it couldn't be done, and she loaded her plane up with fuel and did it. She also grew up in Kenya, and many people that I know or knew at the time had something to do with Beryl. And I very quickly met her, was flying in. I had my PPL, I had my pilot's license, but I used to fly with a very, very experienced professional pilot. We landed in Nairobi, and I was going to spend the night with a friend. And he said, look, and I had my car there. He said, I'm going to see Beryl. I have to stop and get a bottle of vodka. I said, do you want to meet her? And I said, ooh, boy, I'd love to meet her, but I don't know if she'd like to meet me, because I'd heard she wasn't very keen on ladies. She was rather more interested in the boys who flew. The boys who flew were her favorite species. They really were. They really loved her, and they always brought a gift so they could sit there and enjoy themselves with a bottle of vodka. So I did peek in and say hello, and she had nothing to do with me. So, and I understand that. But when it became possible to do her life story, we told very much the true story of her, which was not necessarily personified in the book that she wrote, which had been highly edited by her then husband, who was a Hollywood screenwriter. She writes in her book that her father went off to breed horses in Peru, and she left in the middle of the night with her trusty friend Kabi, who she had grown up with, and her favorite horse, and they rode off into the night and slept in someone's stable. What she failed to mention was that she was married at the time. So we found out those things. We, as much as possible, told the full story of her life. That was something I was very proud of. CBS was the network that was releasing it, and suddenly they kind of thought that they had bought Jennifer Hart. And when I appeared with an English accent and a blonde wig, they didn't know what to do with me. And they didn't know what to do with the project. So it really did not, it was not widely appreciated. And I think that was a mistake.
Well, you've had, as I said, a very illustrious career, a marvelous career, and you continue to do so both on stage, on screen, and in your private life. So kudos to you for the life you have lived so far. Stefanie, thank you very, very much for taking the time to be on the program with us.
Well, Peter, thank you for your copious research and for your wonderful questions. If anyone is interested in the William Holden Wildlife Foundation, let me give you our website, because we're always looking for new members and hope that some of the people you reach and that this interview will reach would be interested and curious about what we do. It is the acronym for the name. So it is W for William, H for Holden, W for Wildlife, F for Foundation, WHWF.org. We're looking forward to seeing you on the website.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Stefanie.
Thank you, Peter. Bye.
Actress Stefanie Powers. Again, if you want to help the William Holden Wildlife Foundation, you can visit their website at WHWF.org. And you can go to our website at thestuffile.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0804, and you'll find the links to the William Holden Wildlife Foundation site and also to Stefanie's.
You've just heard an exclusive excerpt from the Stuph File Program with Peter Anthony Holder. To hear any or all of the full hour-long shows, visit thestufffile.com. Stuph is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's thestufffile.com. A presentation of Flying Fish Communications.